No phones, no neighbors. A locked door, a smiling host, and a cup that isn't tea. Choose trust or survival. Nadia had been self-sufficient for as long as she could remember. Orphaned, young, and shuffled through foster homes, she learned early that no one else would protect her, so she developed a toughness that was as much armor as habit. In her 20s, she carried those unseen scars like quiet trophies. When a colleague waved a flyer for a weekend yoga retreat at a remote mountain lodge, she laughed at the idea of guided serenity. Yet something in the blue cursive lettering, promises of clean air and inner peace, both tempted and troubled her. She accepted the invitation because she wanted to prove that she could still take a break, still let her guard down. She told herself the sense of unease was just her reflexive mistrust of anything that sounded like self-help. On the long drive up, she caught herself thinking about the bedtime stories her mother had told her before she died. Tales of brave girls who outsmarted monsters, and she wondered if bravery was really just showing up even when you were afraid. The lodge, perched high in the Appalachians, was reached by a single-lane road that wound through dark firs and sheer drops. Cell service vanished 2 miles below the summit. By the time Nadia parked beneath a hand-carved wooden arch, her fingers ached from gripping the wheel. The building itself was rustic and beautiful. Stone fireplace, heavy beams, big windows that framed the misty horizon. Inside, a receptionist with a practiced smile handed her a room key and a schedule. She counted 10 other participants, a nurse named Lisa, a couple who held hands like teenagers, 2 wealthy women in matching leggings, a gray-haired man with a Bluetooth earpiece, and a lanky artist in his 20s with ink-stained fingers and dark hair. He caught Nadia's eye, nodded a greeting, and later introduced himself as Jude. His presence was comforting in a way she couldn't yet explain. That evening they gathered in the dining hall, sitting at a long wooden table under low-hanging lamps. Dinner was vegan fare served family style, designed to foster conversation. The retreat leader, Cyrus, was a tall man with silver hair and pale gray eyes that never seemed to blink. He spoke in a soothing cadence about mindfulness, digital detoxing, and reconnecting with nature. At his side was Celine, an assistant with a syrupy voice and an unsettlingly fixed smile. They moved around the table with the choreographed ease of people used to being observed. When Cyrus's gaze met Nadia's, she felt a chill, as if she were the one being studied. He ended the meal with a toast to new beginnings and reminded everyone to attend sunrise yoga. Around her, strangers chuckled and clinked ceramic cups. Nadia kept her mug on the table, fingers tracing the grain of wood. The yoga studio was glass-walled, mats arranged in a circle like petals. Morning light spilled over the mountains and painted the floor in gold and shadow. Nadia was familiar with downward dog and child's pose, but Cyrus's practice was less about form and more about surrender. He asked them to close their eyes, breathe with the mountain, and listen for messages in the quiet. Nadia tried, but every time she let her guard slip, she thought she heard whispering at the edges of the room. It wasn't language so much as intent, a rush of voices without mouths. When she snapped her eyes open, Celine was watching her, head cocked slightly, as if she had been waiting for that reaction. The feeling that something in the room was aware of her did not fade even when the session ended and the others filed out, chatting about the quality of the herbal tea. That sense of wrongness sharpened on the second day. One of the older women didn't come down for breakfast. Cyrus announced that she had left in the night due to a personal emergency, but Lisa whispered to Nadia that the woman's cabin door had been ajar and a teacup lay shattered on the floor. The explanation rang hollow. Later, on a hike through dense forest toward a waterfall, Cyrus veered from the marked trail, leading them toward a clearing encircled by waist-high stones. Strange symbols had been carved into the rocks and into the dirt at the center. Cyrus claimed it was a forgotten sacred site, a place of earth energy. He taught them a chant in a language that made the hair on Nadia's arms stand up. The group joined hands. Jude squeezed her fingers just once, a silent question. She squeezed back in warning. That night, Cyrus announced a special meditation he called the Unveiling. Celine's eyes glittered with excitement. Nadia wanted to feign illness and stay in her cabin. But something in Cyrus's tone made refusal feel dangerous. The great room had been transformed. Lanterns replaced candles, and a symbol matching the one in the clearing had been drawn on the floor in a thick, dark substance that smelled metallic. The guests sat cross-legged around it, as Cyrus spoke about transcendence, sacrifice, and the shedding of worldly attachments. He passed a cup filled with a viscous, bitter liquid. When it reached Nadia, she lifted it to her lips and tipped just enough onto her sleeve to look convincing. Beside her, Jude mimicked her movements. Others drank deeply, eyes closing in trust or fear. The air thickened. The whispering at the edges of her perception became a roar. Suddenly, Lisa convulsed, her back arching like a bow. A guttural scream tore from her throat. Rather than rushing to her aid, Cyrus chanted louder. Celine held Lisa's head steady until the nurse went limp. Then one of the wealthy women began to wail. Celine leaned down, murmured something that sounded like a benediction, and drew a curved knife across the woman's throat. Blood spilled onto the symbol. Gasps and cries erupted, and panic rippled through the circle. The hand-holding couple tried to bolt, but robed figures appeared from doorways that Nadia hadn't noticed, blocking their escape. The man with the earpiece lunged at Cyrus, only to be met by Celine's blade. As his body fell, something inside Nadia snapped. Survival mode took over, a feral space she knew from childhood. These were no healers, they were zealots worshipping something that demanded blood. She seized a lantern and swung, its heavy metal base connecting with the face of the nearest cultist. Glass shattered, oil splashed, and flame licked across the blood-drawn symbol. Jude grabbed Celine's knife as she bent to slice another throat, and slashed at Cyrus. The leader moved with inhuman grace, hissing a word that made the shadows tremble as if they were listening. Jude staggered, eyes glazing. Nadia tackled Cyrus, knocking him backward, lantern light washing over his pallid features. They grappled on the floor. He was stronger than he looked. As they struggled, more cultists joined the fray. Jude recovered and fought with surprising efficiency. His art school muscles found purpose. Nadia remembered every dirty trick she had learned in foster homes. Thumb to an eye, knee to groin, elbow to throat. The room filled with smoke and screams. Amid the chaos, a shape took form near the hearth. At first Nadia thought it was smoke, then she saw horns or antlers and eyes like burning coals. It was made of shadow and hunger. The chanting stopped. Cyrus dropped to his knees, gibbering in the strange language. Celine followed suit, blood still dripping from her hands. The creature looked over its followers with what could only be described as amusement, then turned its gaze to Nadia. In that instant she felt stretched thin, as if something was trying to pull her apart. She bit her tongue hard enough to taste iron, and the world snapped back into focus. Whatever this thing was, it was real, only because enough people believed in it. She refused to add her fear to its strength. "We have to go," Jude rasped, grabbing her arm. They ran toward the kitchen, ducking under flailing arms and skidding on blood-slick floorboards. Nadia kicked out the knee of a cultist who lunged at her. Jude overturned a table to slow their pursuers. In the kitchen, stainless steel gleamed dully in the firelight. She snatched 2 knives from a magnetic strip, tossing one to Jude. The back door was bolted. He threw his shoulder against it until the wood splintered, and cold night air rushed in. They spilled outside into darkness that was somehow more honest than the candlelit horror inside. They could hear the shouts of cultists behind them, and, beneath those, the low hum of something like satisfaction. For a heartbeat, Jude squeezed her hand again. Even in terror, a small thread of trust connected them, a mutual vow that they would not leave each other behind. They sprinted toward the vehicles only to find hoods raised and wires severed. Cyrus had planned for deserters. Nadia's lungs burned, but fear kept her legs moving. She and Jude plunged into the forest, branches slapping their faces. Somewhere behind them, someone screamed, then was silenced abruptly. They stumbled over roots and rocks, guided only by moonlight. They ducked behind a fallen log, pressing themselves into the damp earth as groups of cultists crashed through the underbrush, calling to each other in that guttural tongue. Jude squeezed her hand once, a silent reassurance. When the voices receded, they crawled out and headed downhill. They had to reach the river that cut through the valley. If they could cross, maybe they could follow it to a road. The forest felt alive, and not in a comforting way. Shapes moved just beyond their vision, shadows with antlers, eyes that glowed and then blinked out. Nadia whispered a prayer to no one in particular. She thought of her parents, flashes of their faces like worn photographs. She thought of the foster mother who had told her that sometimes survival was the only thing you could offer the world. She promised herself that if she got out, she would never again trust a promise of easy peace from a stranger. The ground sloped sharply, and the sound of rushing water grew louder. Dawn was a gray smear on the horizon when they reached the river. It was swollen from recent rains, churning darkly between boulders. "There's no bridge," Jude said, voice ragged. They could not turn back. Behind them, sticks snapped. Nadia saw a figure break through the tree line, knife glinting. She plunged into the river without thinking. The water was icy, biting the breath from her lungs. She grabbed Jude's arm, and together they waded, fighting the current. Midway across, the cultist reached the bank and raised his knife, shouting a curse that was drowned by the river's roar. Nadia's foot caught between rocks, sending her stumbling. The current tore Jude from her grasp. He was swept downstream, arms flailing. Panic flooded her. She wrenched her foot free and dove, the cold stealing the air from her lungs. Her fingers brushed cloth, then skin. She latched onto his jacket and kicked, muscles burning, until they broke the surface together. She dragged him toward the far shore, every motion a battle. They tumbled onto slick stones, coughing up river water. The cultist was already halfway across, knife held high. Nadia's world narrowed. She snatched a rock the size of a fist and hurled it with everything she had. It struck the cultist between the eyes. He faltered, slipped, and the current claimed him. His scream cut short. Jude lay on the bank, gasping, eyes wild. "You saved me," he choked out. "We save each other," she replied, pulling him up. They didn't stop moving. The forest on this side of the river seemed less dense, more open. They followed an animal trail that paralleled the water until it spilled into a gravel road used by loggers. When a truck eventually rumbled into view, the driver almost didn't stop. One look at their blood-stained clothes changed his mind. They climbed into the bed, huddling together under a tarp while the mountain receded behind them like a closing hand. In the days that followed, news reports attributed the destruction of the retreat to a gas explosion. There were names of the dead, but nothing about cults or demons. Nadia sat on her couch and hurled a remote at the television in frustration. She thought of Lisa and the others whose families would never know the truth. She also thought of Jude, who had handed her a damp napkin with his number while they sat in the back of a paramedic's ambulance. When they met for coffee a week later, both of them checked the exits and watched the reflections in the window. They did not speak of demons or cults at first. They talked about music and art and the funny way trauma made strangers feel like family. There was a tentative thread between them that might become something stronger, and they laughed at small things as if reclaiming ordinary joy was its own quiet rebellion. They promised each other that if nightmares returned, they would call instead of suffering alone. Healing, they discovered, was not linear but a series of jagged steps forward and back, together, always. At night, Nadia sometimes sensed a presence in the corners of her bedroom, a silhouette with antlers that seemed to watch her breathing. She would stare back until it dissolved into the dark. She kept a candle lit on her kitchen table because she liked the way the flame fought the surrounding shadows. She told herself that fear was a familiar adversary, one she had battled since childhood. Knowing that there were people like Jude who would stand beside her was a solace she had not expected. The world was full of people searching for meaning, some in books, some in violence. Knowing that she could fight back and that she was not alone was a different kind of faith, one that did not require blind obedience. Months later, Nadia and Jude drove back to the mountain, not because they wanted closure, but because they needed to confront the place where everything had changed. The lodge was a charred clearing. Its foundation was a black rectangle under new grass. The stones in the sacred circle were still there, though rain had softened the carved symbols. They stood together in the ring, feeling a faint vibration under their boots, as if something slept below. Without ceremony, they buried the curved knife they had kept, pressing it deep into the earth with the heel of a boot. Dirt under their fingernails felt grounding. They did not speak words of banishment or farewell, they simply left, walking back down the trail without looking over their shoulders. Somewhere in the trees, something watched them go, patient and hungry. Nadia did not know if it would ever truly be gone. She only knew she had survived, and survival was a story she could keep telling.
If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.